So, hello everybody. Let me start by welcoming you and saying thanks to all of you. Why thank you? Well, for two reasons. First of all, I'm very glad and honored to be in Moscow speaking for all of you. That's the first thing. I love the city, I love the country. And the second thing, and that's maybe more important because that is up to you, I have the worst competition ever. I'm opposing against lunch. So when you are all here, that means that you are skipping lunch and postponing it to 2 o'clock. So I'm very happy that you are here and not eating. I'm Michael. I come from Belgium. And I would like to talk to you about a phenomenon that is right now a hype word, a trend in our software industry, which is called shift left. Shift left is a trendy word, is a trendy hype, and means that we should shift as much as possible to the left. For those who saw presentations of me in the past, they might realize that I'm sometimes a little bit too thought-provoking. I create fancy titles that attract an audience. I think it was in St. Petersburg where I presented Fuck Quality. The title was more important than the presentation. So my initial title was not shift left, but shit left. I couldn't do that, but at least I've said it now, so the thought is there. What do I want to talk to you about? Well, I opened up my mailbox yesterday and I saw all kinds of fancy stuff in there. And everything in my mailbox started with a C. Continuous integration, continuous improvement, continuous deployment, continuous testing, continuous everything. It's quite clear that DevOps, shift left, continuous, is all over the place. We're all doing that, or at least we're trying to do that. What I'm going to explain to you is that even though it's a hype word and that all the companies are migrating to a shift left approach, to a DevOps approach, that's not something new. Let me go back 50 years in time. That's a nice place. Unfortunately, it's not where I live. This is, for me, the Waterfall model. For those who are in the software industry for quite some time, this was the main model of software industry for numerous years, where we have in sequence, analysis, development, testing, operations. That model is, for me, one of the best models there is, given some preconditions. The preconditions are that your customer knows what he or she wants, that he or she has the ability to translate his or her desire into decent requirements, that your developer knows how to translate these requirements into code, that your tester has the ability to write decent test cases, and that your ops people knows how to put things into production. Those are the prerequisites. If these prerequisites are met, this is the best model. In reality, we have problems with requirements. We have problems with developers. We have problems with testers. And in your waterfall model, your testers are the last one. These are your last lines of defense. And these times for the testers have shrunken. They have little time because in the end, you have your deadline and that needs to be met. So in the 90s became the V model, the next model, where testing was shifted over multiple development activities. The moment your requirements are ready, you already started writing test cases, which affected the quality a little bit, but also made sure that you had a lot of maintenance on your test cases. Your test cases were ready, but the requirements weren't stable. Then beginning of the 2000s, you had the Agile Manifesto. You switched to Agile, because that would mean that you go for shorter iterations. That also means that with shorter iteration comes earlier feedback. So things were solved. That is all fine. That was Agile Manifesto was 2001. That's 17 years ago. And since then, silence. A lot of companies are transitioning or still transitioning to Agile, but the real benefits are not there yet. And all of a sudden, there's DevOps. That will solve anything. That's the silver bullet of the software industry. We put developers, we put the analysts, we put the testers, we put the ops people all together, and it solves all the problems. Let me ask you, what for you, because I think most of the people have heard about DevOps, are doing DevOps, what are for you the benefits of going for DevOps? Okay, nobody? Yes?
Higher pay.
Excuse me?
Higher pay.
Higher pay, okay, that's great. That's for you, unfortunately not for me. Yes?
To be a universal, unique universal people.
Universal people, multifunctional people.
Yeah, to be in trend and to be not unique, but you can do everything.
Okay. Multidisciplinary. You can be an analyst and a developer and a tester. Okay.
Use
it gives the pipeline of activities so that one cannot bother between the deployment, productions, testing, all the way. So one can deploy from development, testing, then to the production, and there is some automation activities. So one pipeline can do all of these.
Okay, well, that's good. These are all good examples. What I see in my day-to-day projects, I see some advantages of DevOps that at least my management is trying to sell me. With DevOps, we can test sooner. We have earlier deploys, so my tester can start earlier. I have a faster view on my quality because we are testing sooner. I have less defects in the later stages of testing. Because I test sooner, I find more defects in unit testing and automated unit testing. So my business people, my product owners, who have a lot of other stuff important to do, which is actually making money that pays my wage, these do not have to test as much, so that it's cheaper for them. I have less retesting because I found the defects more early. I have less regression testing, which everybody hates, of course, regression testing. But I have less of that with DevOps. And with regards to testing, I have less manual testing because in a pure DevOps sense, it's more about tooling, so more automation. There's a lot of good stuff in there in DevOps. But is it new? No, it's not new. For me, this is old wine in new bags. We have been saying that for 50 years. There's nothing new about the DevOps or the shift left or any continuous principle in there. You want some evidence of that? I'll show you. This guy over here. Okay, it's a funny guy. He's called Barry Boehm. I think in every testing book you'll find his, not his picture, but at least some examples of him. He wrote a book in 1981. That's, what is it, 37 years ago? Software Economics. The cost of correcting and finding a defect depending on the stage of development where you're in. Original graph from the book, copyright Barry Boehm. You see it right there, 1980. What you see with the full line, you see the rising cost of finding and correcting defects depending on the stages of development where you're in. So it's quite clear that the more you go to the right, the more you go to production, the more expensive it becomes to find and correct defects, which is clear. Now you can argue with me that, okay, this slide is 37 years old. Well, the slide is not the images. But it's still true. This is the basis of shift left. The more you go to the left, the cheaper it becomes. That was one of the advantages. Now, the slide is indeed a little bit old. There was a new slide created. What you see right here is a diagram from 2015. The blue is the new Boehm graph, the cost of a defect in a traditional way of working, in a waterfall, sequential, V-model way of working. Now, with Agile, we thought that there will be less cost, that you have more collaboration. Well, in fact, the yellow line is Agile. Well, everything which is incremental, iterative. What you see is in the beginning, you have a higher cost because there's more collaboration, more thoughts about how things should be done. In the end, the cost is a little bit lower, but in general, if you take a formula for both of them, the total cost remains the same. So it's not that it's something completely different. So shift left, testing earlier, can save you a lot of time and a lot of money. That's not the only thing Boehm was saying. A second thing, and that's maybe more important than losing money, because money you can win back every time with a good product, is that the moment you get an idea, in most companies, that idea gets translated into a form of requirements. These requirements get translated in an architecture, a model, a diagram, some technical stuff that developers can work with, because we all know that developers have difficulties in understanding requirements. Developers don't understand the business, business doesn't understand developers. That's a problem, that's a communication problem. That's why we create those models. From the model, we are going to create our code. In the meantime, our testers are going to derive from the model their unit tests. And from the requirements, our testers are going to write their acceptance test. That's your basis model for any kind of SDLC. Now what happens, and what is the origin of all the defects and the failures that we have, that in the transition from the idea to the requirements, there is a problem. The customer doesn't know what he or she wants. They have a problem communicating with each other. There can be a language problem, that can be a diplomatical, strategical problem, there can be numerous problems there. If you have a problem in the communication between idea, the transition between idea and requirement, you have flawed requirements, you have incorrect requirements, which gets translated into the model, gets translated into the code, get translated into the test cases, and get translated into the automated test cases. This is defect multiplication. This is defect clustering. This is why you should do shift left. If you find that problem right here, that gets solved quite quickly. That's not the worst, because that's exactly what Boehm and his graph are explaining. The worst thing is that if I have flawed requirements with problems in, I also have faulty test cases. That means if I will execute these test cases, the code shall be tested against my test cases, and these test cases shall pass. My acceptance test cases will also pass, because the code is based on wrong requirements, my test cases are based on wrong requirements, and 2 wrongs make a right. This is far more costly than doing testing too late. Why is that? Because you create a false sense of security. You create nice reports about your testing. Well, all the test cases are passed, you have 100% coverage, and in the end you go to production and your testing team gets the blame. This is, for me, more important why shift left should be done earlier on the requirements. I'm not the only one who's saying that. These people are also saying that. Tom Gill, Dorothy Graham wrote an excellent book, Software Inspections. Inspections on software, on code and on requirements, that you should take a look in reviewing, in inspecting the quality of the code reviewing, combined code reviewing. This graph, they all seem dated, but they're still true nowadays. What does it show? The cost of releasing software with and without inspections. The full line is the cost of releasing software without inspections. You see that in the beginning, it is cheaper to do, but in the end, it becomes more expensive, and you will release your software later. The dotted line is the line of the cost and the timing of releasing software with inspections. Now, we all know that we are doing some form of reviewing and inspections, but in general, we're not doing it the right way. We're focusing only on a small subpart of it. Either we are doing it on the code, or either we're doing it on the requirements. And most of the time, if you are doing it on the requirements, we create a requirements document of 10, 20, 30 pages, and we send it to the entire organization and ask, please provide me your feedback on it. And if we don't get feedback, then we assume that the requirement is correct. That is wrong. I see that all the time, and then 5 months later, you go into production, and the business is on their back feet, shouting, this is not what we wanted. And they're right. Releasing software, saying that requirements are accepted because people didn't answer to your mail is the same as asking your wife who is asleep, can I go out this night? Of course she's not going to respond to you, go out partying. That's not the goal. The goal is to get a combined agreement on these requirements. So it's quite clear that shift left, with this book, with Barry Boehm, with the false validation, has a lot of trends and identities there. Why should you do it? How can you convince your management, your boss, your product owner, your project manager, whoever has the money in your organization, how you convince them? Well, let me show you some statistics. Statistics about requirements. That might seem strange because this is a testing conference and I'm already talking about requirements. Well, requirements are the source for everything in our industry. If you don't have proper requirements, you can't build software. You can't create test cases. Some statistic about these requirements. 21% of all projects fail due to bad, incorrect, inconsistent, or incomplete requirements. 21% of your projects. Failing means, in this case, being too late, being over budget, or over-resourced, or with improper quality. That's a lot. That means in your company, 1 out of 5 projects fails. Second thing, 57% of your defects are made before the first letter of code has been written. So we are always putting the blame on the developers for writing bad code. No, the blame is with the analysis. The problem is bad requirements. Requirements are incorrect, and it's just the developer who translates these requirements into code. That means that if you go for the inspection part, for the review part, you can avoid 57% of all your defects. That's 57% less time that you should invest in testing. And we all know it's far more easy to review a document than to write test case and execute them. That's a lot. And then we go to the Agile Manifesto. We prefer working software over comprehensive documentation. A lot of companies are understanding this as, we don't write documentation anymore. That's a problem because in the end, your software team, your Agile team is working very well all together, and they're collaborating, and everything is documented in their minds and on small post-its. And in 2 years' time, they are gone. They're consultants or they move to another factory, and You're there with software which is hardly documented. You have no fallback scenario, so your cost of maintaining that software becomes more difficult. The origin of these three whys lies in this drawing. Who knows this one? The Tower of Babel. Created by a fellow company man of me, Bruegel the Elder. The Tower of Babel tells the story of the generosity of mankind and how mankind was great in the beginning. We all were the same, all equal, and we spoke the same language. And to show our strength, to show our superiority, we were going to create a tower that would reach to the skies, to heaven. That we would be on the same equal foot as God. And God, even though he's a very nice person, or she's a nice person, we don't know, she said, I can't have that. I don't want people, humans, on the same level as I did. So with one small switch, he or she changed the language of mankind. Instead of one natural language, we now have millions of languages. What was the effect of that? That the tower never got finished, because we couldn't understand each other anymore. Goiko was talking a few moments ago about boundaries and exceptional cases. Suppose you have a requirement that says everybody between 18 and 65 should be accepted to something. For me, as a normal person, 18 would be included in that scenario. But for a developer who takes it literally, it will not be included. This is misunderstanding in terms of language, and that's the most common way our projects fail. Communication and requirements. Again, I'm not the only one who says that. I have a small movie for you. Oops. And how can I play this? No, it doesn't work. No. Doesn't work. There's no left.
There was a few moments ago. Where's your mouse? Where's your cursor? Over there.
Our company has a new strategic initiative to increase market penetration, maximize brand loyalty, and enhance intangible assets. In pursuit of these objectives, we've started a new project which will require 7 red lines. I understand your company can help us in this matter.
Of course. Walter here will be the project manager. Walter, we can do this, can't we?
Yes, of course. Anderson here is our expert in all matters related to the drawing of red lines. We've won all today's shares.
Nice to meet you. Well, you all know me. This is Justine, our company's design specialist. Hello. We need you to draw 7 red lines, all of them strictly perpendicular. Some with green ink and some with transparent. Can you do that?
No, I'm afraid
Let's not rush into any hasty answers, Anderson. The task has been set and needs to be carried out at the end of the day.
the term red line implies the color of the line to be red. To draw a red line with green ink is, well, it's not exactly impossible. It's pretty close to being impossible.
What does that even mean? Impossible.
I mean, it's possible. There are some people say suffering from color blindness, for whom the color of the lines doesn't really make a difference. But I'm quite sure that the target audience of your project doesn't consist solely of such people.
So in principle, is this possible?
I'll simplify. Line as such can be drawn with absolutely any ink, but if you want to get a red line, you need to use red ink. What if we draw them with blue ink? Still won't work. If you use blue ink, you'll get blue lines. And what exactly did you mean when you talked about the transparent ink?
How to explain? I'm sure you know what transparent means.
Yes, I do.
And what a red line means. I hope I don't need to explain to you.
Not.
You need to draw a red line with transparent ink.
Should you describe what you imagine the end result would look like?
Come on, Anderson, what have we got here? Kindergarten.
No, I'm just trying to get
Let's not waste our time with these unproductive quarrels. The task has been set, the task is plain and clear. Now, if you have any specific questions, then go ahead.
You're right.
Okay, I'm going to stop the video because I was asked to shorten the presentation a little bit. It will be published on the website also. But I saw a lot of people laughing. And, which is a good thing because it is supposed to be a funny movie. But unfortunately, in reality, this is what happens a lot of the time. A developer gives feedback, a tester gives feedback, and some guy says, you're the expert, solve it, even though they do not know what they want. That is the wrong in communication. Now, again, to shift left and how it's being proposed nowadays, In general, if you go for a shift left movement in your organization, you can go for 3 different types of shift left. The first one, again, is a little bit more traditional, is when you have a waterfall or a sequential model, or even a V model, is that with your shift left approach, you try to shift your testing efforts more to the left, more to the bottom. Meaning you invest less in acceptance testing, less that you harass the business with all kinds of difficult questions, and you focus more on unit testing. In your typical agile book, it looks also a bit like your test automation pyramid, where you invest more into your unit testing, less in API testing, and as little as possible in UI testing. Why do you do that? Well, first of all, because UI testing is very slow. Before you get your return on investment with UI testing, it takes a lot of time. Unit testing is something that goes quite quickly. In terms of cost, unit testing is rather cheap and UI testing is rather expensive. So the choice is very easy in a traditional way of working. Suppose you work in a more methodological company, a model-based company. What you're going to do there with your shift left is, instead of relying on requirements to write your test cases, you are going to translate your requirements into a model. And from that model, you will derive automatically your test cases. Which means that instead of reviewing your requirements, you are implicitly reviewing them by creating the model. And you can have that model validated by the business. That means that any gaps, any inconsistencies, any assumptions will be made clear the moment you create a model. Which is a good thing, because if you assume, you make an ass of you and me. As a tester, I never want somebody to assume. I want them to validate the proper behavior before the first letter of code has been written. The last model is your incremental model, and that is where most companies are right now. Instead of going from the traditional V waterfall type, we are trying to split it up into small iterations, and thus splitting up the testing effort sooner. Getting quicker feedback, getting quicker user validation, meaning you shift more and more to the left. That is, at least if you apply your incremental iterative model correctly. A lot of companies are saying they are agile, are saying they are DevOps, and in fact they are water scrum or Vagile or Wedgile or any combination of that. Yes, we work in sprints, and our developers are developing for 5 days, and after the sprint is done, then we shift it to the testers. That's not agile, that's not shift left, but that happens a lot. That's something you should avoid. So you have 3 choices. You have your traditional choice, your model choice, or your incremental choice. Independent of your choice, you can choose for different flavors. And this is where the acronym comes in, because I think in my title it says the land of acronyms, and I haven't thought about an acronym yet, so here comes the acronyms. What are the 3 flavors? Well, if you are developer focused, it's called TDD, test-driven development. If you are testing or user focused, it's ATDD, acceptance test-driven development. And if you are for both of them, if you want to collaborate, it's BDD, behavior-driven development. Now, if you take a look, and if you take a good look in the internet, and do a search on the difference between TDD, ATDD, and BDD, this is very, very difficult. Because everybody says something else. And I'm here, I'm going to say something else also. So that's very difficult for you. But I try in a few slides, and they showed me I have less than 10 minutes. I will try to highlight for you, if you want to make a shift left movement, or you want to implement or improve your shift left, which choice you should make, whether it's TDD, ATDD, or BDD. So in 10 minutes, TDD, ATDD, BDD, one-on-one. TDD, whoopsie, that's not good. Apologies for that. Still works? Yep. The moment they have wireless headphones and wireless electricity, I will be so happy. Certainly wireless electricity. TDD, test-driven development. What is it? Well, it's test-driven development, meaning it's development based on testing. Typically done on a unit test level. That means it's done by developers. It handles a test-first approach. What does that mean, the test-first approach? That before you write your first letter of code, you first create test cases. And it holds something called red-green refactor. That's the easy thing that everybody understands. Red-green refactor, what does that mean? Well, red-green refactor means that your developer thinks about the change he or she wants to make. For that change, he or she considers what is now the smallest increment, what is the smallest part of my code I can change to make that change. Before he or she writes that code, he or she writes a unit test and executes that unit test. that unit test will fail. That unit test become red, hence the red in the circle. Then, afterwards, your developer will write the code that makes the unit test pass. Not write the code that he or she wants to write, or refactoring, or adding all kinds of features that nobody asked for. No, just the code that makes the test pass. The test is now in green. We all know that sometimes the code from the first run is not the best way of working. So then, the code written to make the test pass is integrated better, is refactored, and the design is improved. So in that continuous circle of TDD, you have red-green refactor, meaning that in the end, you have properly working test cases, automated. What is the advantage there? That before the coding starts, before the first line of code is written, all your unit tests are automated. You have 100% code coverage. You have immediate feedback on your code, which is great for developers. And your code is always refactored, so there's no need for a hardening sprint or for a refactoring sprint or to hold production for 2 weeks because our developers are making the code more beautiful. No, it's inside the algorithm, it's there. On the negative side, and that's the red, this does not work for legacy code. It makes absolutely no sense to go for TDD when you already have 1,000 lines of code. You can do that for the new lines of code, but not for the existing ones. I think one of the biggest pitfalls of TDD is that you will create large bodies of unit tests. If you do this strictly and completely, you will end up with thousands unit tests. That becomes very expensive to run them. I've seen companies where for the entire night, with every check-in, we had hours of unit tests automatically run, which is a big downside for your servers, so it needs scalability. Another downside is you only check whether you have built the thing in the right way. You are checking things, not testing things, you are checking things from the point of view, have we done this technically correct? So TDD is more on the technical side, automation side. ATDD, one letter difference, is also development methodology. There's a D in there and people tend to forget that. It's development. It's focused on acceptance testing, so it's a higher level of testing. Typically, and Goike also talked about that, specification by example, collaborative workshops. Typically what you see is these guys, the three amigos. The tester, the developer, the analyst, working together, coming to a combined sense of what is needed, how they can work together. By creating specifications, by creating examples, by thinking about the solution and the solution area there. Where TDD was about creating the thing in the right way, ATDD is rather about creating the right thing. It's about validation, it's not checking. So there's advantage in there because your users are in the business itself, they're validating the design from the beginning. So the advantages of ATDD, you have your acceptance tests ready before coding starts, which are validated. Also an advantage, if you're not very well in test automation, if you as a tester are not reliable on tooling for that, automation is not required. You just have your your acceptance test cases. And if you have automation, there are multiple frameworks there. I think the most common are Robot and Cucumber. Fit and Fitness are a little bit less, but they are there for you to happen. On the negative side, when you talk about agile and embracing change, ATDD has difficulty with change because your acceptance tests are written before coding starts. That means that within the sprint that you're in, you cannot change these test cases. And if you do, it comes at a tremendous cost. Secondly, if you apply both TDD and ATDD, there's some duplicates in automation because you're automating the same things from a different point of view, from a different objective, but the cost of automation is higher. The last child, in the sense, is BDD, behavior-driven development. And I think that's also the main thing that people are trying to do right now. This is the newest kid on the block. It's also development methodology. So that's 3 times the development methodology. It's talking about user stories, about scenarios, in a domain-specific language. Here, the user is central. It's not the tester who's central in ATDD or the developer. No, this is the user. It's consumer-centric approach. How does it work? Well, we all know in Agile, the as I want, because, or so that. What you do in BDD is you get scenarios that explains the requirements better. Instead of writing acceptance criteria, you write scenarios. Given a certain precondition, when something happens, an action, then this should happen. Given that I'm moving too fast around, when I use my arm and I start wiggling too much, then my microphone will drop on the ground and my presentation will be distorted. That's your scenario that you can have. That's something you want to avoid. So for my next presentation, I put this in my back pocket and I don't have that anymore. That's a solution for that. Now, what is the difference between your typical user stories and your scenarios? Your user story will create or capture business requirements. Your scenarios are one level deeper with more details and specifics. So it's very good if you can put your testers in there and your analysts in there to create more content for them, because these will be the basis for your test cases. Your user stories and your acceptance can be automated. They shouldn't be, or they can be, but it's not mandatory to do so. Scenarios must be automated. Typically, that's something you do in Gherkin. This can be very handy in there. Your user stories are documented visually on a Scrum board, a Kanban board, a task board, in Jira, or wherever you want to put them. Your scenarios are what you write in code or in phrase templates, given the given when then structure. So that's the main difference between all of these. Advantages. With BDD, you have less documentation. You can drop down the big requirements documentation, and you write everything down in your scenarios. It links very well with any kind of iterative software development lifecycle, and the same framework that you apply for ATD can be applied here. Biggest downside, and certainly for the analyst that's true, is the learning curve. Your analyst needs to learn not to document anything anymore in natural languages, in phrases, in large documents, but need to learn the as, I want, because, given when then structure. That's a complete different mindset. And if you do this incorrect, your requirements are not becoming better, but becoming worse. So you're farther behind than you were before. Now, there are three options that you have. If you want to combine those, how can I do it? What is for me the flow for going for shift left? Well, suppose you have an idea, your vision, your epic, that gets translated into your user stories. Well, then you can go for three options. You can go for BDD, and then you translate the user story into scenarios. From the scenario, you're going to derive acceptance tests. If you go for TDD, you translate the user stories into unit tests. And you translate those unit tests into code. If you go for ATDD, you translate your user stories into your examples. You create examples for them and derive them to acceptance test. So if you tell me as a company we do BDD and TDD and ATDD, that's ridiculous. Then you're doing too much. You can do TDD in combination with BDD, TDD in combination with ADD, but not all together, because then you have a lot of duplication there. Last slide, because I saw the sign that my time is up. Takeaways for you to take home to your company to convince everybody. What's in it for me? Why? What have I learned in this course? TDD is something typically done by your developers, the developers. ATDD, BDD by the users. So if you're a developer, go for TDD. If you're a user, an end user, go for ATDD or BDD. TDD and BDD makes automation mandatory. You cannot do TDD or BDD without automation. ATDD, it's optional. It's highly recommended, but if you don't have any tooling, go for ATDD. TDD is not prioritized. Prioritization is important. It's just a developer that before a single line of code has been written, writes a unit test. So if time's up, if there's not enough time, it can be that the most important feature is not being developed. ATDD, BDD, the user is there, so the priority has been put by the user. So in terms of creating the most revenue in the quickest sense, ATDD and BDD are your choices. ATDD and BDD are very well in supporting collaboration, working together as a group, the three amigos with the big hats. So that's always a very nice tip if you want to create some group sense, put those hats in there. I've seen teams in a collaborative workshop that all wear Superman costumes that works to bond to create a group feeling. And don't remember that the D stands for development. Automated testing is not a goal. And I know I'm preaching against the wrong audience here, because you might leave and say, we want to go for the shift left approach. We want to go for whatever acronym is here. It's not you who decides that. And that's a problem that most companies have. The tester has an idea and they want to impose that idea, that solution, to the entire company. If you start doing TDD, BDD, ATD from a testing point of view, it's just another way of creating test cases. There's hardly any benefit in there. All these methodologies, all the shift left ideas and flavors are for the entire company, for bringing the tester, the analyst, and the ops people together. That's the idea. If you just do it for testers, it's not enough. Just don't do it. If you can't convince your developers, if you can't convince your analysts, don't do it. And finally, I think that's the most important thing and the most main message here. Your goal should always try to push your defect curve to the left, to avoid defects and to bring your defects more to the left-hand side, to the requirements and to the unit test. Because the more you go to the right, the more expensive it becomes. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I wish you a very nice day and a fruitful conference, and enjoy your lunch afterwards. Thank you.
Some questions.
Okay.
You can look your device for questions.
Oh, yeah.
Сейчас у нас есть буквально 1 минута для того, чтобы задать вопросы.
Может быть, 2 минуты.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is how we can shift left when requirements change once a week because of bad management.
Is it because of bad? Okay. Are you certain that your requirement change once a week because of bad management? Or is it because the user changes his opinion every week?
I think it's crazy customers and maybe bad management with just say, okay, we do it.
Okay. Ben Linders wrote an excellent book about that, What Drives Quality, and quality regarding requirements. He says that you need 2 things for have good requirements and go for a shift-left approach. That is stability and flexibility. And those things might seem counterintuitive. You need flexibility to answer all your questions of your user. So if the user wants to change, he can. But within your sprint, your 5 days, that requirements remain stable. So you make your sprint smaller. That means if the user wants to change something, the cost is only 5 days, not more than that. And then you apply to the embrace change methodology. That can be a solution.
Thanks for your speech a lot. My question is, how can we shift left, and is it even possible if the first stage of development is already started and it was started as a waterfall or V model, and suddenly the clients and the manager decided to change their minds and to shift left and make everything agile? And if we can do this, how quality assurance engineer can help to perform this shift left and make it less painful?
Okay, that's a very good question. First of all, I don't think you should shift left or move to agile or anything because it's a trend. If you work in an industry where your software remains stable for a number of months or years, don't do that. Then you stay with your waterfall VML, that works and it works fine. If you say, as a tester, I want to be in the driving seat and I want to infuse my organization with a shift-left approach, the first thing I would recommend is a workshop. Putting the developer, the tester, and the analyst together and think about the requirements. That's your first step. And if that works, then start documenting things, for example, in a Gherkin structure that you can automate afterwards. But don't just say, next Monday we're going to do A TDD or BDD and everybody needs to do it. That doesn't work. And I see management pushing that. We go for agile tomorrow. No, that doesn't work. Small bits, small low-hanging fruit, and that will help. You're welcome.
Did you retrieve the best question?
There were only 2 questions.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
No problem. Are there any more questions?
Есть ли еще, может быть, последний самый вопрос?
All right. I want to ask you how to shift left in safe.
Okay. Shift left, you mean the SAFe framework, scaled agile framework? Okay. Well, shift left is embedded in SAFe. I think the most important thing how you can shift left in SAFe is your PI planning. You know, everybody knows the PI planning and SAFe?
Yes.
Okay, SAFe is a framework to scale your agile to beyond your team to the entire organization with different levels. And one of the first things you do in SAFe is to have a PI planning meeting. And that's the biggest constraint for most companies. What you do in a PI planning meeting is you bring everybody from your agile release train, so all the impacted agile teams, you bring them together, developers, analysts, testers, and you discuss what the impact of each user story is. So you have 100, 120 people in the room, just like here, or even more. The product owner will explain what he or she wants to do, what are the features, and then the teams go sit behind the whiteboard, in front of a whiteboard even better, because behind you don't see anything, in front of the whiteboard and discuss what are the implications if we do this. If we implement that feature, what is the impact on that structure over there? If we do that integration, what is the impact over there? That's your shift left. If you don't do that, then in the end, all the teams are working on their own aisle. You merge everything together, and then the problems appear. So that's how SAFe can assist in that.
Thank you. I understand that it starts here, so start here.
Yes.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Спасибо всем за внимание. The best question.
Okay.
Can you choose
Yeah, the best question. Okay. Here you are. Okay.
Да, спасибо большое за вопрос.
Okay. Thank you very much.